The fluorescent light above Bay 3 had been flickering for 11 days. Marcus Webb noticed it the first morning it started, the way he noticed everything in the Hartwell Aerospace campus, the slow drip behind the third-floor water fountain, the soft creak in the east stairwell that meant the weather seal was failing, the smell of burnt copper that drifted from Lab 7 every Tuesday when the ventilation system cycled wrong. He noticed these things the way a man notices his own breathing, without effort, without announcement. He was mopping the corridor outside the orbital systems wing when Dr. Patricia Hale came through the double doors at 7:14 in the morning, her badge still swinging from clipping it on in the parking lot, her coffee already half gone, her face carrying the particular tightness it had worn for 9 days straight. She did not look at him. Most of them did not. He moved the mop bucket to the left, out of her path. She walked through the space he had made without slowing. Behind her came 2 men from the Northgate contractor team, both in pressed shirts, both carrying tablets, both talking over each other about frequency drift and thermal compensation windows. One of them caught his rolling cart with a shoulder and kept walking. The cart spun a quarter turn. Marcus steadied it with one hand. He went back to mopping. On the wall-mounted monitor above the security station, the news ticker was running the same story it had been running for a week. Atlas 7 communication satellite enters critical failure window. Defense Department confirms signal degradation. Northgate Systems engineers working around the clock. The anchor said $2 billion. She said it the way people say numbers they cannot actually imagine. $2 billion. A machine the size of a school bus, spinning in low Earth orbit at 17,000 miles an hour, going quiet in pieces. Marcus wrung out the mop. He looked at the monitor for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked back at the floor, which still needed finishing, and finished it. Before we go any further, drop your city in the comments right now. It does not matter where you are watching from. This story is going to hit differently, depending on where you have been in your life and what you have been told you are. Subscribe and ring the bell, because what is about to be revealed in the next 50 minutes is not a story about satellites or government contracts or aerospace engineering. It is a story about what happens when a person decides, very quietly, that they do not need the world to know what they are capable of. They just need to do it. Marcus Anthony Webb was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, in the winter of 1981, the second son of a machinist father and a mother who taught remedial reading at Booker T. Washington Elementary for 31 years. His father, Raymond, worked for a pipeline fabrication company and came home every evening smelling of metal shavings and machine oil, and Marcus associated that smell from his earliest memory, not with hardship but with competence, with a man who understood how things were built and why they held together and what happened when they did not. Raymond Webb was not a man who talked about what he knew, he demonstrated it. He would take apart the washing machine on a Saturday morning and have it running again by noon, and he never consulted a manual and he never asked for help. And when 8-year-old Marcus asked him how he knew what was wrong with it, Raymond looked at him for a moment and said, "You listen to it first. Everything that is broken is telling you what it needs. You have to be quiet enough to hear it." Marcus carried that sentence for 43 years. He was not the student his teachers expected. Not because he lacked ability, but because the ability he had did not perform well in the formats they offered. He was slow on timed tests. He lost points for showing work in ways that were correct but unconventional. He read obsessively, but in directions his teachers did not assign, pulling books about radio wave propagation and orbital mechanics and electromagnetic theory from the library shelves when he was 14, 15, 16, working through them with a patience that looked, from the outside, like something slower than it was. His high school counselor told his mother he was a B- student with mechanical aptitude, might do well in a trade program. His mother thanked the counselor and drove home and told Marcus exactly what the counselor had said. She told him because she believed he had the right to know what the world thought of him. She also told him because she had seen him read a 400-page text on signal theory at age 15, and she wanted him to sit with the distance between those two things. He sat with it for a long time. He enrolled at Louisiana Tech on a partial scholarship, studying electrical engineering. He was 22 when he took his first course in satellite communication systems, taught by a professor named Dr. Irene Castillo, a compact, exacting woman from Monterey who had worked at JPL for 12 years before moving into academia and who had no patience for students who confused intelligence with preparation. She handed back his first exam with a note at the top that said, "You understand this material, but you are not yet precise. Precision is not optional in this field. The difference between close and correct is the difference between a satellite that works and one that becomes expensive debris." He became precise. He graduated with honors. He went to work at a defense contractor in Huntsville, Alabama, doing signal systems analysis on communication satellites at a level that was, by any measure, exceptional. He published 2 internal technical papers before he was 30. He was passed over for promotion twice, both times in favor of men with more conventional credentials and more comfortable personalities in meetings, men who knew how to perform expertise rather than simply exercise it. He did not complain. He understood the logic of the environment even as he understood it was wrong. What changed everything was not professional. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March of 2009 when his wife Diane called him from the car on her way home from her sister's house in Decatur and did not arrive. The other driver ran a red light at 47 miles per hour. The accident reconstruction report used words like unsurvivable. Marcus sat in a hospital waiting room for 4 hours before a doctor came through the door with a face that told him before the words did. Their son, Caleb, was 3 years old. Marcus took 6 weeks of bereavement leave and then went back to work because going back to work was the only structure he had, and structure was the only thing keeping him moving in the mornings. He hired a woman named Paulette from his church to watch Caleb during the day, and he dropped Caleb off each morning and picked him up each evening and made dinner and read stories and answered questions about where Mama was with an honesty calibrated carefully to what a 3-year-old could carry and still sleep at night. He did this for years. He moved to Fairfield, Ohio in 2017 for a position at Hartwell Aerospace, a mid-sized government contractor with a strong portfolio in satellite communication systems. The job paid better, the schools were good. He rented a house on Caldwell Street with a yard big enough for Caleb to run in, and Caleb, who was 11 by then and deeply interested in how things worked, spent his first weekend in the new house taking apart an old clock radio he found in the garage and asking his father with complete seriousness why the capacitors were arranged the way they were. Marcus sat on the garage floor with him for 2 hours and explained it. At Hartwell, Marcus was hired as a systems maintenance specialist, level 3. The title was a bureaucratic classification that technically covered a range of technical functions, but in practice, at Hartwell, it meant he was the person who maintained the facility's equipment and who handled what the engineers called the unglamorous layer, the physical infrastructure, the hardware that sat beneath the software, the power systems, the thermal management units, the physical signal routing architecture that everyone else assumed was working because someone was making sure it worked. That someone was Marcus. He wore a gray Hartwell uniform. He carried a maintenance cart. He had an office, technically, but he was never in it because the building and its systems required constant attention, and constant attention required constant presence. And constant presence meant that over 6 years, Marcus Webb learned every system in that building the the way his father had taught him to learn broken machines. He listened to it. He also, because no one told him not to, read every technical document that crossed the shared server to which his security clearance gave him access. His clearance was Tier 2, standard for maintenance staff with access to sensitive areas. It gave him access to system architecture documents, maintenance logs, failure reports, historical incident analyses. He read them all. He read them the way he had read those library books at 15, methodically, at his own pace, in directions no one assigned. By 2019, Marcus Webb knew more about the Atlas satellite communication architecture than most of the engineers on the Northgate contract team. He had never told anyone this. There was no moment when it seemed like the right thing to announce, and more importantly, there was Caleb to consider, and the job to consider, and the dignity of doing the job he was paid to do without performing additional expertise for audiences that had not asked. He mopped floors. He replaced filters. He logged maintenance tickets. He fixed the things that were broken before anyone noticed they were broken. He listened, and in the spring of 2024, when Atlas 7 began its slow deterioration, in low Earth orbit, Marcus Webb started listening to that too. Dr. Patricia Hale had been the lead systems architect on the Atlas 7 project for 4 years, and she was a genuinely exceptional engineer, the kind of person whose technical instincts were sound and whose professional reputation was built on real accomplishment rather than on maneuvering. She had earned her position. She knew she had earned it, and this knowledge, which should have been simple confidence, had over years acquired a certain defensive quality, a sharpness that emerged when she felt her authority questioned or her expertise overlooked. She did not think of herself as the kind of person who dismissed people. She thought of herself as efficient. There was a difference in her mind between dismissal and prioritization, between ignoring someone and simply not having time for conversations that did not advance the problem she was trying to solve. She had been aware of Marcus Webb in the ambient way she was aware of most of the maintenance staff. He was quiet. He was thorough. He had once caught a power fluctuation in Lab 4 before it damaged equipment worth $80,000, and she had noted this in the way she noted other pieces of institutional competence, as background reliability, as infrastructure. She had never had a conversation with him that lasted more than 90 seconds. The trouble began, or rather the trouble became visible, in February of 2024, when Marcus submitted a maintenance ticket flagging what he described as an anomalous thermal pattern in the building's primary signal processing array. The array was the physical hardware through which Atlas 7's ground communication was routed. It was not, strictly speaking, part of the satellite itself. It was the ground-side infrastructure. But the ticket noted a pattern in the thermal readings that Marcus characterized as consistent with the early-stage signature of a cascade desynchronization in a phased array antenna system. The ticket was reviewed by a Level 1 technician named Gary Poole, who read the phrase cascade desynchronization and assumed it had been copied from somewhere Marcus did not fully understand, and who closed the ticket with a note that read, "Thermal variance within acceptable parameters, no action required." Marcus filed a second ticket 3 weeks later, more specific. The language was precise in a way that should have been alarming in its precision, because imprecise people do not write with that kind of specificity about failure mode propagation in satellite antenna systems. Gary Poole escalated it to the Northgate contract team as a formality. The Northgate engineer who received it, a man named Derek Cass, read the first paragraph, saw the name on the ticket, saw the job title, and sent back a 3-line response. Maintenance concerns noted. No engineering action warranted at this time. Please continue standard monitoring protocol. The response took 4 days. Marcus read it. He saved it. He went back to his maintenance rounds. By April, Atlas 7 was losing signal coherence on its primary downlink band at a rate that the Northgate team attributed to orbital debris interference, a plausible explanation that had the advantage of being externally caused and therefore not attributable to any engineering decision anyone on the team had made. The debris interference narrative held for 6 weeks, during which time 3 engineering meetings produced 17 action items and no resolution. In May, the signal degradation accelerated. The debris interference narrative became harder to sustain. The Defense Department sent a liaison, then 2 liaisons, then a deputy undersecretary whose name was mentioned in the same news ticker that Marcus watched for 3 seconds each morning before going back to his floor. It was during this period that Dr. Hale's stress crystallized into a kind of ambient pressure that touched everyone in the orbital system's wing. She was not cruel, she was not unfair in the ways that matter most, but she was running on very little sleep and very high stakes, and the accumulated weight of a project that was failing in ways she did not yet fully understand. And these conditions produced, in the corridor outside Lab 7 on a Thursday morning in late May, the moment that this story turns on. Marcus was there to check a conduit junction that had been flagged in his morning log. He had his tools and his cart and his clipboard. Dr. Hale came around the corner fast, the Northgate team behind her, 2 defense liaisons beside her, all of them talking, all of them moving with the particular velocity of people who have a meeting they are late for and a problem they have not solved. She saw him in the corridor and stopped, not out of recognition, out of obstacle. She said, "This corridor needs to be clear. We have contractors coming through." He said, "Yes, ma'am. I have a conduit junction to check at the panel behind you." She turned to look at the panel. She turned back. She said, "Can that wait?" It was not a question. One of the Northgate men, Derek Cass, the one who had sent the 4-day non-response, looked at Marcus and said, "He's just here to fix a light or something, Patricia. Let's go." "Just the janitor," one of the defense liaisons said, not loudly, not meanly, in the tone of a man making a practical observation. Dr. Hale said, "Can you come back in an hour?" Marcus said, "Yes, ma'am." He moved his cart. He waited. He came back in an hour and checked the conduit junction, which was fine. And then he went to his office and opened a document he had been building for 3 months, and he added 2 more data points, and he kept writing what Marcus Webb had been doing in the hours between maintenance rounds and after Caleb went to bed, and on Sunday afternoons when the building was quiet, was building a failure analysis, not for any official purpose, not because anyone had asked, because the Atlas 7 system was failing in a way he understood and no one else seemed to, and because the building that housed its ground infrastructure was his building, and because Diane had once told him, early in their marriage, that he had a gift for understanding the language broken things spoke, and he did not know how to turn that off. The analysis was 94 pages by the time Atlas 7 entered what the news was calling the critical failure window. It began with the thermal anomaly he had first flagged in February. The anomaly was not a standalone event. It was the surface expression of a much older problem, a design tolerance decision made during the ground array's installation in 2019 that had placed the thermal management buffers for the primary signal processors at a specification that was technically within parameters but functionally inadequate for the operational load the system would eventually carry. The specification had been approved. It had been reviewed. It had been correct on paper in a way that ignored a real-world variable that was not in the model. The variable was a specific harmonic resonance that developed in the phased array antenna system under prolonged high-demand operation. It was not in the model because it only became significant after sustained operation at 87% capacity or above, and during the design phase, projected operational load had not been expected to exceed 74%. Atlas 7 had been running at 91 to 94% capacity since late 2022, when 2 other satellites in the constellation had experienced unrelated failures, and their load had been redistributed to Atlas 7. No one had updated the thermal model. The harmonic resonance was slowly, precisely, predictably degrading the signal coherence of the primary downlink system from the inside. Marcus had worked this out from maintenance logs, from the thermal data he had been collecting since his first ticket, from the architecture documents in the shared server, and from 3 textbooks on phased array antenna systems that he had checked out of the University of Cincinnati's engineering library using a card he had held since 2018. The solution was also in the document. It was not simple. It required a carefully sequenced ground-side recalibration of the thermal buffer allocation in the signal processing array, combined with a specific adjustment to the antenna phase rotation protocol that would interrupt and reset the harmonic cycle. It would take approximately 18 hours. It required someone who understood both the physical hardware and the signal architecture, because it had to be done in a precise sequence that moved between both layers simultaneously. It had never been done before on this system because no one had ever needed to do it. Marcus had sketched the full procedure in the last 22 pages of his document. He had the document on his personal laptop. He had a printed copy in the drawer of his office, under his spare set of filter replacement kits. He had not sent it to anyone. He had filed 2 maintenance tickets. He had received 2 dismissals. He had no formal credential in satellite systems engineering. He had no title that would cause Derek Cass to read past the first paragraph. He had understood, in the specific way that a black man who has worked in technical institutions understands, that arriving at a door and announcing that you have solved a problem no one believes you were smart enough to have noticed is not the same thing as being let through the door. So he had waited. He had waited for the problem to become impossible to root around. He had waited for the moment when the cost of dismissing the answer would finally exceed the comfort of dismissing the person delivering it. That moment, he judged, based on the news ticker and the deputy undersecretary and the way Dr. Hale had not slept in what appeared to be several days, was close. He had one more piece in place. 3 weeks earlier, he had sent the full analysis without introduction to a single email address. The address belonged to Dr. Irene Castillo, his professor from Louisiana Tech, who had retired from academia in 2021 and who now served as an independent consultant to the Defense Department on satellite communication system failures. He had not told her he was sending it. He had attached it to a single sentence that said, "I believe this is what is wrong with Atlas 7. She had not responded yet. He checked his email at 6:15 each morning before Caleb woke up. On the morning of June 9th, there was a message with no subject line from an address he recognized, and it contained 4 words. "Where are you now?" The van was not a dramatic van. It was a grey government fleet vehicle with federal plates and a small seal on the front passenger door that was too small to read from any distance. It parked in the Hartwell visitor lot at 7:52 on a Tuesday morning, and 2 people got out of it. One of them a man in a contractor badge Marcus had never seen, and one of them a compact woman in her late 60s with close-cropped grey hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms full of people louder than her. Marcus was emptying the corridor recycling bins at the east entrance when they came through the door. Dr. Castillo stopped in front of him. She looked at him for a moment. She said, "Marcus Webb." He said, "Dr. Castillo." She said, "The document you sent me. I need to know if you can walk through the hardware with me in person." He said, "Yes." She said, "Right now." He said, "Let me log out of my maintenance ticket." He logged out of his maintenance ticket. He walked them to his office. He pulled the printed analysis from the drawer under the filter replacement kits and set it on his desk. Dr. Castillo picked it up. She read the first 3 pages standing in the doorway. She turned to the man with the contractor badge, whose name was Colonel James Whitfield, Defense Satellite Infrastructure Division, and she said, "This is it. This is what we've been missing." She said it the way someone says something they already knew. Whitfield said, "You knew this already?" She said, "I suspected the harmonic resonance pathway When they redistributed the constellation load in 22, I did not have the ground array thermal data to confirm it. He had the thermal data. She looked at Marcus. She said, 18 months of thermal logs. He said, since the first anomaly. She said, and the recalibration procedure in the back. He said, pages 72 through 94. She set the document down. She said, we need to brief Dr. Hale and the Northgate lead today. He said, yes, ma'am. She said, you should know that when we walk into that room, there will be people who are going to have a difficult time with this, with you, with the source of this. He said, yes, ma'am, I know. She looked at him for a moment longer. She said, are you ready? He said, I have been ready since February. The briefing room on the second floor held 12 people when Marcus walked into it, 11 minutes after Dr. Castillo had called Dr. Hale's assistant and used a phrase that caused the assistant to pull Hale out of a live technical call with the Defense Department without apology or explanation. Dr. Hale came into the room 2 minutes after Marcus sat down. She looked at Whitfield. She looked at Dr. Castillo. She looked at Marcus in his grey Hartwell uniform, his employee ID clipped to his chest pocket, his printed analysis on the table in front of him. She said, what is this? Dr. Castillo said, this is the failure analysis for Atlas 7, the complete failure analysis. Sit down, Patricia. Hale sat. Derek Cass came in behind her. He saw Marcus and stopped moving for exactly 2 seconds in the doorway. Then he sat across the table. Dr. Castillo did not introduce Marcus. She opened with the conclusion. The cascade desynchronization in the phased array antenna system, she said, is driven by a harmonic resonance pattern that developed under sustained high-load operation following the 2022 constellation redistribution. The resonance is interacting with an undertolerance in the thermal buffer specification of the ground signal processing array, which was identified and logged in a formal maintenance ticket submitted to this facility in February of this year and again in March. She picked up the analysis from the table. She said, the analysis you are looking at was built from 18 months of thermal data collected during routine maintenance operations, cross-referenced with the architectural documentation in the shared system server and completed by a member of this facility's maintenance staff. She set the document in front of Dr. Hale. She said, Marcus Webb, Systems Maintenance Specialist, Level 3. Hale looked at the document. She looked at Marcus. Marcus did not look away. He did not speak. He waited. Cass said, with respect, how would a maintenance tech have the background to Dr. Castillo said, he has a degree in electrical engineering from Louisiana Tech. He has 6 years of direct experience with the physical signal routing infrastructure of this facility. He was one of my students, and he was the best technical mind in a room that contained several good technical minds. He filed 2 maintenance tickets that were dismissed without engineering review. He chose to complete the analysis independently and forward it through channels that would be taken seriously. She said that last sentence quietly. No one missed it. Hale was reading the document. She turned to page 12. She turned to page 31. She was not reading for comprehension. She was reading for error, for the place where the logic would break down, where the analysis would reveal its ceiling. It did not break down. She turned to page 72. She read the recalibration procedure. She read it twice. The room was very quiet. She set the document down. She looked at Marcus and she said, this procedure, you are confident in the sequence? He said yes. She said, what is the failure risk in the phase rotation adjustment at step 11? He said, if the rotation is adjusted before the thermal buffer allocation is stabilized, the resonance cycle will spike before it breaks. There is a window of approximately 4 minutes where the signal will degrade further before the reset completes. If you interrupt the procedure in that window, you will accelerate the failure. You have to stay in it. Hale was still looking at him. She said, how long have you known what was wrong? He said, I had a working hypothesis in February. I confirmed it in April. I completed the full analysis in May. She said, why didn't you? She stopped. She already knew why. She looked at the document in her hand. hands. She looked at the maintenance ticket printout that Dr. Castillo had placed beside it, the one Cass's team had returned in 4 days with 3 lines, the one that said no engineering action warranted. She said, "I need the room, except for Dr. Castillo and Mr. Webb. Everyone else." Cass stood. He did not look at Marcus as he left. The door closed. The 3 of them sat in the quiet for a moment. Dr. Hale said, "I'm going to need you to walk me through the full procedure." "In the array room, today," Marcus said. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "There is a $2 billion satellite that has been failing for 7 months." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry." She said it looking at the table, not at him, and it was not a polished apology. It was the start of something she did not know how to finish, and he accepted it the way he accepted most things that were true and incomplete. He said, "Let's go fix it." Patricia Hale sat in her car in the parking lot at 8:47 that evening. The recalibration had taken 16 hours and 38 minutes. Marcus had walked her through every step. He had stood beside her at the hardware panel and named each component with the specific familiarity of a man who had replaced them all at least once. He had called the Step 11 window correctly. 4 minutes and 20 seconds of deepened signal loss before the resonance cycle broke, before the harmonics flattened, before the telemetry on the screen shifted from the jagged signature of a failing system to something approaching coherence. When the signal stabilized, there had been a moment of silence in the array room. Dr. Castillo, who had stood in the corner for the entire procedure, had said nothing. Marcus had looked at the screen for a long time. Then he had picked up his clipboard and logged the maintenance activity. Hale sat in her car now and thought about the sequence of decisions that had led to this day, not the large decisions, the ones easy to identify as errors from a distance, the staffing decisions, the review processes, the way expertise had been sorted by credential rather than demonstrated. Those were real, but they were structural. They were the kind of errors that lived in processes. She was thinking about the small decisions, the way she had said, "Can you come back in an hour?" The way she had moved through him rather than past him for 3 years. The way the building had contained this person with this knowledge, and she had understood him as maintenance, as infrastructure, as the reliable layer beneath the work she was doing, without ever asking what he knew. She had passed him in the corridor 11,000 times. She thought about Derek Cass's email. She had already drafted a response to the defense liaison's questions about the Northgate team's review process. She had not sent it yet. She did not know exactly what she was going to say. She knew what the honest answer required, and she was not sure she was ready to say it out loud, not because she was dishonest, but because saying it out loud meant accounting for the gap between who she believed she was and what she had done. She was starting to measure that gap. It was wider than she had thought. She started the car. She drove home. She did not turn on the radio. Caleb was awake when Marcus got home, which he had known he would be because it was nearly 9 o'clock and Caleb was 13 and therefore technically asleep but actually reading with a flashlight, and would wait until he heard the front door before turning the flashlight off and pretending. Marcus hung his keys. He went to the kitchen and drank 2 glasses of water, standing at the sink, looking at the dark window over the yard. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway in his socks, his hair unflattened on one side from where he had been lying against the pillow. He said, "You were gone a long time." Marcus said, "Yeah." Caleb said, "Paulette left dinner in the microwave." Marcus said, "I know." Caleb came into the kitchen and sat at the table. He picked up the salt shaker and turned it in his hands the way he turned things when he was thinking, a habit he had had since he was 4 years old, since the clock radio in the garage. He said, "Was it hard today?" Marcus looked at him. He said, "Yeah." Caleb said, "But you fixed it." It was not a question. Caleb said it the way he said things he already knew. Marcus said, "Yeah, we fixed it." Caleb set down the salt shaker. He said, "Dad, did those people know you were going to be the one?" Marcus pulled a chair out and sat across from his son. He looked at the table for a moment. He looked up. He said, "No." Caleb said, "But you knew." Marcus said, "I knew what was broken, and I knew how to fix it. That's all I knew for sure." Caleb thought thought about this. He said, Mom would have thought that was enough. Marcus did not say anything for a moment. The refrigerator made its low hum. The yard outside was dark and still. He said, yeah, she would have. Caleb looked at him the way he sometimes did, with Diane's particular quality of attention, the kind that held a person without pressing them, and Marcus felt the familiar weight and warmth of it at the same time, the way grief and love occupied the same space after long enough. He said, go to bed. Caleb said, you're eating first. Marcus said, I'm eating first. Caleb went upstairs. Marcus reheated the dinner Paulette had left, and ate it at the kitchen table alone, and thought about nothing in particular and everything at once, which was the state he had lived in for 15 years and had learned slowly to call peace. 3 weeks after the recalibration, on a Saturday morning, there was a knock at the door on Caldwell Street. Caleb answered it because Marcus was in the garage with the hood of the car up, and Caleb was closer. He came to the garage doorway and said, there's a woman at the door. She has a dish. Marcus set down his wrench. He wiped his hands on the shop rag and walked to the front door. Dr. Patricia Hale was standing on the porch in jeans and a light jacket, holding a covered ceramic dish with both hands. She was not in her work posture. She looked like a person who had practiced what she was going to say and had decided, somewhere between her car and the porch, to set the script down. She said, I made too much lasagna. My son went back to school last week and I keep cooking for 4 people. Marcus looked at the dish. He looked at her. He said, that's a lot of lasagna. She said, I know, I'm sorry about the lasagna. She said it with the particular emphasis of someone who means 2 things at once and knows the other person knows it. He said, do you want to come in? She said, I don't want to impose. Caleb appeared at Marcus's elbow and said, we have lemonade. Hale looked at Caleb. She said, are you Marcus's son? Caleb said, yeah, I'm Caleb. I know what a phased array antenna is. There was a pause. Hale said, do you? Caleb said, my dad explained the whole thing to me. The harmonic resonance and the thermal buffer and everything. It took like 2 hours, but I get it now. Hale looked at Marcus. Marcus said, he asked. She looked at Caleb again. She said, your dad is a very good teacher. Caleb said, he's pretty good at fixing things too. You can come in. She came in. They sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, and drank lemonade from the pitcher Caleb poured with the concentrated seriousness of someone who did not want to spill. And Hale asked Caleb about school, and Caleb told her about the robotics team, and then asked her, directly and without embarrassment, why engineers sometimes missed things that seemed obvious. Hale was quiet for a moment. She said, sometimes we're looking so hard at the complicated version of the problem that we stop hearing the simple version. Caleb thought about this. He said, my grandpa used to say you have to listen to what the broken thing is telling you. Hale looked at Marcus. Marcus said, my father, he was a machinist. Hale said, he sounds like he was a smart man. Marcus said, he was. The lasagna was left on the counter in its ceramic dish, covered, and when Hale stood to go, she said she would come back for the dish whenever it was convenient. And Marcus said there was no rush, and Caleb said goodbye from the couch where he had already returned to his book, and Hale stepped off the porch and walked to her car, and Marcus watched her go from the open doorway, not with warmth exactly, not with coldness, with the particular quality of a person who is deciding consciously to hold the space open, not to close the account quickly, not to let it close too slowly, to let the repair take the time repair actually takes, which is longer than people want it to and shorter than they fear. On the first Monday of August, Marcus arrived at the Hartwell building at 6:45, the same time he had arrived every working day for 6 years. He logged into his maintenance system. He checked the day's ticket queue. He saw a new ticket submitted at 11 the previous night from a user ID he recognized as one of the overnight engineering team. Intermittent vibration in the secondary power routing unit in Lab 3, minor, logged for awareness. He was about to flag it for standard review when something in the wording caught him. Intermittent secondary routing unit. He pulled up the power load history for Lab 3 over the previous 2 weeks. He found a pattern. It was small. It was early. It was the kind of thing that only mattered if you understood what it could become. He opened a new document. He started writing. Outside the window, the Hartwell parking lot was filling up in the early morning light. Cars pulling in, people walking in with coffee cups and badges, and the particular forward-leaning posture of people who had problems to solve. Inside the building, the Atlas 7 ground array was running clean, the signal coherent and strong, the thermal readings nominal, a machine in orbit doing its job because a man on the ground had spent 18 months listening to what it was trying to say. Marcus wrote the first line of the new document. He logged the anomaly date. He noted the pattern. He began. Outside in the hallway, the fluorescent light above Bay 3, the one that had been flickering for 11 days back in the spring, the one he had replaced on a Wednesday afternoon without putting in a ticket because it needed doing, and he was there, burned clean and steady. No one had noticed it was fixed. He had fixed it anyway. He kept writing.